In the world of rock and roll, few names command as much respect, fear, and fascination as Ozzy Osbourne, the Prince of Darkness. The wild man of rock, the voice behind Black Sabbath, and one of the most unpredictable figures in music history. For decades, Ozzy has lived at the center of chaos. He's seen bands rise, fall, implode, and disappear. He's shared the stage with legends and lost friends to the madness of fame. But through all of it, one thing remained constant: Ozzy's brutally honest opinions. He never sugar-coated, never followed trends. And recently, he did something that took fans by surprise. He opened up about the artists he actually doesn't like, the ones he's never really connected with, musically or personally. It's rare for someone as experienced and respected as Ozzy to talk about dislike in music, because rock culture is built on respect among artists. But when Ozzy speaks, people listen. To understand what Ozzy meant and why it matters, we have to go back to where his journey began, in the dark, industrial streets of Birmingham, England. A working-class kid with a dream, a stutter, and a deep desire to escape the gray monotony of factory life. In those early years, Ozzy found something magical in sound, in distortion, in chaos, in that rebellious scream that said, "I won't live by your rules." It was the sound that would define heavy metal. But back then, music wasn't about fame or money. It was about truth, and truth was something Ozzy always valued, even when it cost him. In countless interviews, Ozzy has mentioned how certain artists never resonated with him, not because they lacked talent, but because their music felt empty. He came from a place where every note was born out of pain, fear, and frustration. So when he listened to bands that sounded too perfect, too calculated, he felt nothing. Fans always assumed Ozzy was too wild to care about musical taste. But the truth is, Ozzy has always been a purist. He listens with his soul, not his ears. When he talks about artists he dislikes, it's never out of jealousy. It's because, deep down, he believes music should come from the gut, not from a marketing department. One of the first times Ozzy hinted at his musical dislikes was during a radio interview in the early 2000s. He was asked what he thought of the new wave of alternative and pop rock acts dominating MTV. Ozzy paused, chuckled, and said, "They sound like computers, man. There's no danger in it anymore." That one line said everything. To Ozzy, rock music was never supposed to be safe. It was supposed to scare people, to shock them, to make them feel alive. And that's where his dislike often comes in, towards artists who, in his words, forgot what rock was about. He once mentioned how he respected musicians like Lemmy from Motorhead because they lived and died by the music. They never tried to impress anyone, but he couldn't stand the pretentiousness that crept into the rock scene over time. He said, "Some of these guys act like they're gods, but they've never even played a bad gig in their lives. They don't know what it's like to bleed for the crowd." For someone like Ozzy, that authenticity is everything. So when he looks at certain modern rock acts, he sees what he calls plastic rebellion. Artists who look dangerous but sound safe, who talk about darkness but never lived it. And to Ozzy, that's unforgivable, because he lived the darkness and survived it. But Ozzy's musical honesty didn't start with modern artists. Even in the early days, there were musicians he never connected with. For instance, during the rise of progressive rock, bands like Yes, Genesis, and Emerson, Lake and Palmer, Ozzy often admitted that he never really understood them. He once joked, "I don't need a degree to listen to rock and roll." It wasn't an insult, it was a reflection of how he viewed music. To him, rock was supposed to be primal, not academic. He admired the technical skill, sure, but he missed the emotion, the danger. He preferred rawness. That's why he gravitated toward the blues, toward Zeppelin, Cream, and even early punk. Those sounds had imperfections. They had character. To Ozzy, a missed note was more human than a perfect solo. Over the decades, people asked him about rival bands, and while Ozzy rarely spoke harshly, he wasn't afraid to tell the truth. One of the most viral moments came when someone asked what he thought of the Beatles versus the Rolling Stones. Ozzy smiled and said, "The Beatles saved my life, man. But the Stones? I could take them or leave them." Fans were shocked, but it made sense. The Beatles were the reason he picked up a microphone. Their melodies, their evolution, their sense of purpose, that touched him. The Stones, on the other hand, felt too bluesy, too repetitive for his taste. It wasn't hate, it was just preference. Still, when Ozzy talks about artists he dislikes, there's always something deeper beneath it. It's not about style or genre, it's about spirit. He once said, "I can tell in 10 seconds if someone means it or not." That instinct comes from decades of being on stage, watching faces, feeling the crowd's pulse. You can't fake that connection. And Ozzy can spot fakeness from a mile away. When nu metal exploded in the late 90s and early 2000s, Ozzy had mixed feelings. He appreciated the aggression, but not always the message. Some of those bands, he felt, were copying rebellion instead of living it. During one interview, when asked about certain acts, he laughed and said, "Half these guys wouldn't last a week on tour in the 70s. It was classic Ozzy, funny, but painfully true." He respected bands like Slipknot and Korn for pushing boundaries, but when asked about some of the more commercial acts, he shrugged. "It's not bad," he said, "it's just not rock." To Ozzy, rock isn't a sound, it's a soul. You can play heavy music all day long, but if there's no heart behind it, it's not real. The truth is, Ozzy has always been a contradiction. A man who loves melody but lives for chaos. Who appreciates emotion more than precision. That's why, even though he's part of metal royalty, he's never been afraid to criticize the genre itself. He once said that some modern metal bands sound like machines fighting each other. He respected their talent but missed the groove, the swing, the human touch. When it comes to personal dislikes, Ozzy rarely names names. He's not petty, but sometimes his honesty slips through. For example, he once admitted he never understood punk's hatred for classic rock. "They said we were old farts," he said, "but we were just doing what they were trying to do. Shake the system." And while Ozzy admired the punk spirit, he didn't like when it turned into self-destruction for the sake of image. He's also mentioned his struggle with certain 80s glam rock bands. He felt many of them cared more about their looks than their sound. In his words, "If you spend more time on your hair than your riffs, you're doing something wrong." That's Ozzy in a nutshell. Brutally direct, no filter, no diplomacy. What makes his opinions interesting isn't that he dislikes certain artists, it's that his reasons always come back to the heart of rock itself. He believes music should challenge you. It should scare you a little. It should pull you somewhere you didn't expect to go. Anything less, to him, is just noise. Over time, though, Ozzy has softened. Decades of touring, health battles, and family life have changed how he views other musicians. In more recent interviews, he's often added, "You know, I might not like their music, but I respect anyone who gives it a go." That's the wisdom of age. But even then, the fire's still there. He still rolls his eyes at trends, still mocks the idea of perfect pop rock, and still calls out the industry for chasing streams instead of souls. What's fascinating is how, even after all these years, Ozzy's perspective remains relevant. In a time when AI can write songs and image matters more than lyrics, his demand for authenticity hits harder than ever. He reminds us that real music isn't about algorithms or polish. It's about imperfection, honesty, and emotion. When fans heard Ozzy openly mention his least favorite styles and acts, it wasn't out of bitterness. It was out of love, love for music that actually means something. And in a world where everyone is scared to offend, Ozzy's raw honesty feels refreshing. He's not afraid to say, "That's not my thing," because for him, music isn't about pleasing everyone. It's about being real. Behind all of Ozzy's chaos, madness, and infamy, there's always been a deep love for sound, for that connection between an artist and an audience. When that connection is missing, that's when Ozzy feels disappointment. That's when he calls it out. After all, this is the man who bit the head off a bat on stage, who was banned, mocked, and nearly destroyed by fame, but still got up and kept singing. If anyone has earned the right to speak his truth about music, it's Ozzy Osbourne. When he finally opened up about his least favorite rock artists, he wasn't trying to start a fight. He was trying to remind everyone what rock really is. It's not image, it's not fame, it's not perfection. It's pain, it's rebellion, it's soul. And maybe that's why Ozzy Osbourne, even after all these years, still matters. Because he represents something that can't be faked. Something that can't be auto-tuned. The raw, unfiltered heartbeat of rock and roll. He's seen trends come and go. He's seen legends fall and fakes rise. But through it all, Ozzy remains. Honest, unapologetic, human. So when he says he doesn't like certain artists, maybe it's not about hate at all. Maybe it's a challenge, a message to future generations of musicians. To stop pretending, to stop polishing, to stop trying to be perfect, and to start feeling again. Because in the end, that's all Ozzy ever wanted, music that's real. Music that bleeds. Music that makes you feel alive. And maybe that's the greatest lesson of all from the Prince of Darkness himself. Because when Ozzy Osbourne speaks, he's not just talking about music. He's talking about the truth behind it. And that truth will always outlive the noise. Thanks for watching.